Muscular system. Functions of the muscular system. Physiotherapists need to know the muscular system of the body because they use exercise to help their customers improve their movement, strength, and flexibility in the muscular system, and to help injuries in the short and long term. Functions of the muscular system. Movement is the main function of the muscular system. Muscles are the only type of tissue in the body that is able to contract, that is able to move other parts of the body. The two movements are called fine and gross movement. Fine movement is smaller movements. Examples for fine movement are writing, facial expressions, and speaking. In fine movement, the smaller skeletal muscles are usually the muscles that do this action. Gross movement is a larger and more coordinated movement. Examples for gross movement are walking, running, and swimming. Respiration. The muscular system helps the respiratory system. It helps the respiratory system by pushing air into and out of the respiratory system. It does this by the muscles called the diaphragm, which contracts and relaxes. There are a group of muscles called the additional accessory muscles of respiration. The muscles that are in that group are the sternocleidomastoid, serratus anterior, latissimus dorsi, serratus posterior superior, and the pectoris major and minor. These type of muscles are only used when you are doing exercise or when a person has an asthma attack. An example of muscles helping the respiratory system is when you are breathing. When you breathe in, the diaphragm contracts, and when you breathe out, the diaphragm retracts. Posture. Posture, like sitting and standing, is maintained due to muscle contraction. The skeletal muscles, which are the muscles that attach bones to tendons, always make fine adjustments that then hold the body in stationary positions. The tendons of quite a few muscles extend over joints, and this means that they contribute to stability. Heat production. Muscle contractions produce heat, and overall 70% of body heat is produced by energy that is produced in the muscle tissue. When your body heat drops below optimal level, the skeletal muscles will then increase their activity in order to make heat. An example of this is when the body shivers, and when the body shivers, this makes energy in the muscles to move, which then makes heat. A sporting example is when you're running, your body heats up because your muscles are moving and contracting more, and all of this produces heat. Constrictions of blood vessels. Vasoconstriction is when the arteries get thinner, and vasodilation is the widening of arteries, meaning they dilate. Another function is communication. Now we're going on to the characteristics of muscles. Excitability. Excitability is where its ability to respond to a given stimulus that can be delivered from a motor neuron or a hormone. Extensibility is the ability of a muscle to be stretched. For example, in order to be able to flex the elbow extensor muscles then have to extend for it to allow flexion to occur. Elasticity. Elasticity is the ability to bounce back or recoil back to the original length of the muscle after it has been stretched. Contractility. Contractility is the ability of the muscle cells to vigorously shorten. For example, you will be able to flex your elbow. You would need to conduct the biceps brachii and also the other elbow flexor muscles in the anterior arm. Types of muscle tissue. The location of there are 4 types of muscle tissue: cardiac, smooth, and skeletal. Three. The location of the cardiac muscle tissue in the walls of the heart, while smooth muscle tissue is located in the walls of the visceral organs, and the skeletal muscle tissue are located in muscles that are attached to the skeleton, hence why they are called skeletal muscle tissue. The function of the cardiac muscle tissue is to force and contract the heart. This then causes the heart to pump blood around the body, whereas the function of smooth muscle tissue is to form organs, e.g. the stomach and bladder. This helps the stomach and bladder to change shape, to then facilitate bodily functions. Then the functions of the skeletal muscle tissue is to move other structures and bones. The fatigability of the cardiac muscle tissue is slow and rhythmic, whilst the fatigability of the skeletal muscle tissue varies. The cardiac muscle tissue has endomysium layers only, and so does the smooth muscle tissue. When the skeletal muscle tissue has endomysium, perimysium, and epimysium layers. The innervation system for the cardiac muscle tissue is involuntary, and so is the smooth muscle tissue, whilst again the skeletal muscle tissue is voluntary, although the cardiac muscle tissue has the autonomic nervous system as well. Skeletal muscle gross anatomy. For each skeletal muscle fiber, there is a cylindrical muscle cell. An individual skeletal muscle can be built by hundreds or thousands of muscle fibers that are all bundled together. They are then wrapped in a connective tissue, and then each muscle is surrounded by a connective tissue, which is called the epimysium. The fascia, which is a connective tissue that is outside of the epimysium, separates and it surrounds the muscles. Each bundle of muscle fiber is called the fasciculus. This is surrounded by something called the perimysium, which is a layer of connective tissue. In the fasciculus, every muscle is surrounded by something called the endomysium, which is also a layer of connective tissue. Skeletal muscle cells are fragile and soft. The connective tissue that is covering the furnish support and protection for the cells allows them to hold forces of contraction. Coverings then also provide pathways for the passage of nerves and blood vessels. The endomysium, perimysium, and epimysium all extend beyond the fleshy parts of the muscle and the belly to form a tendon of aponeurosis. The aponeurosis and the tendon form attachments that go to all muscles, all the way to the perimysium of bones, or even to connective tissue of other muscles. Skeletal muscles have loads of nerves and blood cells. Nerve cells send an impulse to the skeletal muscles before they can contract. Either an artery or a vein go with a nerve that goes to the epimysium of a skeletal muscle. Loads of blood vessels and nerves follow the connective tissue components of the muscle of a nerve cell, and this is with one small blood vessel. The one small blood vessel is called a capillary. Muscle roles. Agonist. An agonist is a movement in the muscles that provides a major force to complete the movement. Agonists have another name, which is called the prime mover. A sporting example for showing an agonist is a bicep curl. A bicep curl produces flexion at the elbow. In a bicep curl, the bicep muscle is the agonist. During a bicep curl, the bicep is the agonist when it contracts concentrically on the way up and eccentrically on the way down. The agonist is both because in both cases it is the prime mover. Antagonist. An antagonist is in movement. It is the muscles that oppose the agonist. During the flexion of the elbow, which is the bicep, is the agonist. The antagonist is the tricep muscle. Whilst the agonist contracts during movement, the antagonist relaxes. Another function of an antagonist is to stop or slow down a movement. You would only see this if a bicep curl that you were doing was very heavy, and so the tricep muscle, which is the antagonist, would put a lot of tension to help regulate the movement as weight lowers back down. When the elbow extends against gravity, the bicep becomes the antagonist and the tricep becomes the agonist. A sporting example of this is a bench press or a push-up. Synergist. A synergist is a muscle that stabilizes a joint around where a movement is occurring. This then helps the agonist then turn effectively. The synergist muscles also help create movement. A sporting example is a bicep curl, where the brachialis and brachialis are the synergist muscles. This assists the biceps in stabilizing the elbow joint and to create movement at the elbow joint. Fixators. Fixator is a movement in the muscles that stabilizes the origin of the agonist and the joint that which the origin moves over in order to help the agonist function effectively. A sporting example of this is in a bicep curl, and the fixator would be the rotator cuffs. The majority of the fixator muscles are found working around the shoulder and hip joints. The insertion moves with contraction, whilst the origin is a fixed attachment. Muscles mainly work by attaching two separate points in the body. The insertion is the point of attachment in a muscle, where normally more movement occurs, and the origin is the other point of attachment, where it's an anchoring point rather than a point of movement. Here is a diagram for the major muscles of the body. These are all the movements in the shoulder joint and their agonists, origins, insertions, and antagonists. This is all the movement in the radial ulnar and elbow and knee joint, with their movement and agonist, origin, insertion, and antagonist. This is all the movement in the hip joint, with their agonist, origin, insertion, and antagonist. This is all the movement in the spine, with their agonist, origin, insertion, and antagonist. Types of muscle fibers is covered in a different separate video, which will be linked in the playlist. Muscle contraction overview. A motor neuron triggers the release of acetylcholine into the motor end plate. Acetylcholine initiates depolarization within the sarcolemma, which is spread through the muscle fiber through the T tubules. Depolarization then causes the sarcoplasmic reticulum to release stores of calcium ions. On actin, the binding sites for the myosin are covered by troponin and tropomyosin. Calcium ions will then bind to the troponin and then tropomyosin, and due to this will change shape. This will then make the binding sites free from myosin. The myosin will then join with actin filaments. ATP then joins to the myosin, breaking the actin and myosin. ATP hydrolysis causes the myosin to change position, moving them forward towards the next actin binding site. The myosin then binds to the new actin sites and returns to their original form. The myosin then moves to the actin filaments. As actin filaments are attached to the Z lines, the dragging of actin pulls the Z lines closer together, which then, due to this, shortens the sarcomere. As the sarcomeres get shorter in length, then the muscle fibers will contract. Neuromuscular junction. The postsynaptic terminal is receiving part of the connection, which is between the two nerve cells. A sarcolemma is the cell membrane of a striated muscle fiber cell. The main function of the sarcolemma is to stop friction between bones and muscles. The ACH receptor is the chemical which the motor neuron from the nervous system need, they can release in order to activate muscles. The vesicle is a store of ACH, which initiates the release of calcium, which is an essential part of muscle contraction. Mitochondria is also known as the powerhouse of the cell. It's called the powerhouse of the cell because it gets the cell nutrients it needs. The sliding filament theory. Calcium ions. Calcium remains in the sarcoplasmic reticulum until it is released by a stimulus. Calcium then connects to the troponin. This then makes the troponin change shape and remove the tropomyosin from the binding sites. Myofibril. Myofibril are made up of sarcomeres. Sarcomeres are the functional units of a muscle. The function of the myofibril is to perform muscle contraction. This is all through the sliding filament theory. Sarcomere. A sarcomere is defined as the distance between two Z distant or Z lines. When a muscle contracts, the distance between the lines then shorten. Actin. Actin is the muscle contraction results from reaction between the actin and myosin filaments that will generate their movement. Myosin. The binder between the actin and myosin allows the myosin to then function as a motor. This then acts as pushing the filament sliding. Cross bridges. A cross bridge is where actin and myosin attach. This happens within the muscle cell.